This is particularly important for expats because expats want to avoid double tax at all costs. I can safely say, Bronwin, most of my clients have no issue with paying tax. It's paying double tax that really makes them feel that tax is a burden in their life. And they're looking for peace of mind to ensure that if they were to accept that kind of opportunity to work remotely, that they're not unfairly being taxed by both South Africa and the country in which they are rendering the services in. Good afternoon to everyone who's watching today's podcast. My name is Delano Abdoll. I'm the legal manager of cross-border taxation at Tax Consulting South Africa. And I'm joined today with my esteemed colleague from our tax technical team, Bronwin Richards. Bronwin, thank you very much for joining today. And I hope we have a good conversation on some of the misconceptions that South African expats have when deciding to break tax residency.
Yes, there are a few of them.
I can believe that. I think a good starting point, Bronwin, is maybe just to get an understanding of why do you think individuals who go abroad and work remotely for South African-based companies are perhaps hesitant to break their tax residency status with SARS?
It's a question we've seen come up quite a few times over the past few months. And it is a misconception, as you mentioned earlier, that keeping your ties to South Africa in the form of employment with the South African employer means you cannot cease your tax residency. SARS will automatically assume that you are still a tax resident because your employer is South African, which is not necessarily the case.
I think to build onto that, Bronwin, I have clients who very much struggle with breaking tax residency where spouses go abroad. One spouse got a job offer and they're working for a company which is abroad. The other spouse, however, feels that they cannot break tax residency. And to your point, because SARS might have the view, you can't do that if your employer is based in South Africa. And I think today's conversation is really to try correct those misconceptions so that taxpayers who are abroad can carefully navigate what their options are to save that foreign income from being taxed by SARS.
Absolutely. And I think a good place to start probably is that a lot of taxpayers who are looking to cease tax residency, many of them do their research before they approach us. And they might see conversations popping up about South African sourced income. And SARS is always going to tax your South African sourced income. So if you are working for a South African employer, what's the point of ceasing your tax residency? Because that income, which is South African sourced, or so they think, will still be taxed in South Africa. So why go through this whole process? It's not going to bring them any tax relief.
Very good point. I think the elephant in the room is, what do we mean by source in the world of tax in South Africa?
Yes, so source is not as straightforward as it might seem. The everyday person might think South African source means it comes from South Africa, right? But that's not the case when it comes to taxation. And there's a specific meaning of the term source when you look at the source of income. So there are a few cases in South Africa. It's been debated widely in our judicial sphere. But the main case that we always refer to is Lever Brothers. So in that case, the judge very clearly set out two tests. You have to look at the originating cause of the income, and that is, what did you do to earn the income? Did you render employment services? Did you sell something? There's a few things that you can look at, but for employment specifically, it is, did you render employment services that gave rise to that income? Once you've established that originating cause, you then have to look at the location of where you were when you were getting that income. So the location of the originating cause, put simply. And that is where you were when you were rendering those employment services. It's not about where your employer is. It's not about where the money is paid into your bank account. It is about where you personally were sitting down and doing that work to earn that income. And if that was in Finland, then it's not South African sourced. If it was in Mozambique, it's not South African sourced. If it was in South Africa, then it would be South African sourced. So it really is about where you are when you render the services that give rise to income.
Okay. So if I break that down just to an example, I'm a South African national. I currently work for a South African-based company. My employer has approached me to work remotely for the company, but in another country. And in terms of this employment arrangement, I will be physically based outside of South Africa, the company still being based in South Africa. And if I render my employment services to the employer from abroad, the income which my employer is paying me, are you saying that it is then sourced outside of South Africa in terms of the Lever Brothers judgment?
Absolutely correct, yes.
Okay. I think this is particularly important for expats because expats want to avoid double tax at all costs. I can safely say, Bronwin, most of my clients have no issue with paying tax. It's paying double tax that really makes them feel that tax is a burden in their life. And they're looking for peace of mind to ensure that if they were to accept that kind of opportunity to work remotely, that they're not unfairly being taxed by both South Africa and the country in which they are rendering the services in. So in that example then, say for instance, I'm a taxpayer in a country where that not judicial system, tax system is source-based. If I render the services in that country, am I paying tax in that country as well as to South Africa?
Yes, very likely. With the source-based system, and it's exactly the same source as we were discussing earlier, it's where you are sitting when you're performing the services that give rise to income. So a country with a source-based system will tax all receipts and accruals that arise from within that country, where you're sitting there in your desk, in your rental home office, and you're doing the services there. That arises within that country, and that country will want to tax that income. Whereas residency-based systems like we have in South Africa says if you're a South African tax resident, we're taxing your worldwide receipts and accruals. So whether you are sitting in your home office in another country and paying tax there because they're saying this is, sourced in our country, you will still be liable to tax in South Africa because of our residency-based system. So that's where I guess there's a little bit of friction between different countries where it comes to source-based versus residency-based.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head there that in South Africa, because of our residence-based tax system, the Income Tax Act gives SARS a very long arm in terms of taxing your income sourced abroad.
Yes.
So you would be taxed in that country as well as from a South African perspective, unless you apply for an exemption,
Yes.
maybe the Section 10102, alternatively, breaking tax residency. And that's completely an option available to anyone who's listening to this podcast,
Yes.
who's in a circumstance where they're exposed to double tax for working remotely from a South African-based company and would like to temporarily break their tax residency with SARS. So the effect of that is SARS would then only tax them on South African-sourced income.
Correct.
You would think it's a no-brainer, actually. And I'm not sure if you have any comments on perhaps how this misconception arose in the market. Is it maybe that taxpayers aren't really aware or briefed very well when they become expatriates on their filing obligations in South Africa?
Yes, I think that's definitely one part of it. We see a lot of articles in the media. There's always something about expats. And there's rarely anything that touches on filing obligations in South Africa, or at least if it does, it doesn't go into much detail, which is fair because tax is highly technical and it's not necessarily something you put in an article for a quick Sunday morning read. But I do think that there is that these misconceptions stem from a lack of understanding, really, of all of the puzzle pieces that make up tax. It is not, you don't look at a DTA, a cessation of tax residency, in isolation. There's always going to be extra plugins that you have to also look at, including, where is your employer based? Do they still withhold PAYE if they're based in South Africa? A lot of people don't know that if you cease your tax residency, there may not be a PAYE obligation on your South African employer. There's many, many things that you have to consider, and it's difficult to convey that in a casual manner, if I can put it like that.
No, I think well put. There's a lot of inroads to your specific facts and circumstances. Yes. Do you think maybe taxpayers also believe that their employer would give them these options of understanding there is the possibility of breaking tax residency? Or should viewers rather take the stance that they approach a tax expert to help them navigate their personal facts and circumstances if they are in a situation where they're working remotely for a South African-based company?
Yes, so I've had clients on both sides. So I have had clients who come to us, they want to cease their tax residency or they want to work remotely but remain with their South African employer, and their employer is well-versed. They've done this a few times. They have a few employees who are remote abroad, so they know what to tell their employees that are thinking of doing the same. They know how to sort of explain, you still have a filing obligation here, but don't worry, if you're employed here, it's not going to affect your cessation. And then on the other hand, there are employers that don't know at all. They're in the same boat as their employee. They don't have the knowledge, the background, or the foundation to accurately advise their employees. And even when the clients do come to us and they do have a bit of background and their employer has briefed them a little bit, we usually find one or two things that the clients have questions about which the employers could not answer. So it is always in everyone's best interest to approach a tax practitioner because we deal with this on a day-to-day basis. We know exactly how to apply the law to your specific set of facts, because while it might be specific to you, you maybe have had 5 other clients who all had a little something that's similar to you.
Yes.
And so definitely approach a tax practitioner if you want to get the right advice in a timely manner, so that by the time you want to cease residency and go work remotely in, Mauritius, you're sorted. You don't have to worry about all these niggling things in the back of your mind.
No, thank you very much for that, Bronwin. I think today's podcast was very informative. And for any of our viewers who do have opportunities to work abroad remotely, I think approaching a tax practitioner or a tax expert just to carefully navigate what complexities might arise and iron out any inroads that can help you save tax, at least double tax for that matter. Thank you very much.